Hi everyone, it's Dr. D. Terrence Foster. I'm glad you could join us today, and I'm going to be talking about grieving and the old process of grieving. Of course, it can be a very complex subject, and the way I look at it is that grieving is about how we live and how we die. There are different type of grieving. You could grieve because you have a relationship that has been severed. Could be a divorce, could be a business relationship or professional relationship or others. Those are also type of grieving. But the type of grieving that I'll be looking at today is about life and death. Now, a famous psychiatrist by the name of Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross described 5 stages of grieving. Number 1 is denial, next is hunger, and next is bargaining, and then there's depression and acceptance. Now, others have come along and have added their name and had other stage of grieving. You may see 7 stage of grieving, 12 stage of grieving, and whatever the number is, but the concept and the general idea is essentially the same. Now, because of the complexity of it, let me just make a few points here with respect to that. And one is, who has died? Who is this person that has died? This could be a wife, a husband, a child, a family member, someone who is homeless. It could be someone who is an associate, a friend, a business partner. It could be anybody that died. So who is this person and what relationship is that person to you? So that's a component that is important in understanding. The next question is, why did this person die? Did they die of a chronic disease like heart disease, lung disease, disease of the lungs? Or did they have cancer? Were they murdered? Was it a suicide? Was it someone who has a tragic accident like a motor vehicle accident or some form of accident? Was this person in a vegetative state where they didn't even realize that they were sick or have no idea what was happening in their life? That's another component. Another component is, where did this person die? Did the person die at home? Did they die in a hospital? Did they die in, say, a skilled nursing facility or a nursing home? Were they found in the street as a homeless person? Did they recover their body? There are many cases where many people have died and their remains have not been recovered. That's also an important part of it. The next question within that framework is, who was with that person when they die? Sometimes people die and there's no one around. They just die alone and by themselves. The next question, well, at what age did this person die? Was it an infant, a teenager, a toddler, someone who is in their 30s, 20s, 60, 100 years old? How old was this person? And of course, what impact did this person have on other people's life? What relationship did they build? How did they impact society, if at all? Did their life have meaning to somebody or to how many people? Because then the grieving process would be often affected by that. And after we've considered all of those things, then the question is, what can we do about it, if anything? Sometimes there's nothing we could do about it. And then the question is, how do we carry on? Can we carry on? Do we have the strength to carry on? How do we move on and do the things that we need to do without the person that we have lost? How can we move forward? Let me take you back to some example of people that have died. Most of us will remember JFK, John F. Kennedy, who died in November of 1963. He was assassinated. He was 46 years old. Dr. Martin Luther King died in April of 1968. He was 39 years old. Do we realize or remember that when these 2 men died, that so many people cried and mourned for days? And you know what's also interesting about this? Most of those people have never been anywhere near Martin Luther King or JFK. Nowhere close. Some of them have been hundreds of thousands of miles. But they could relate to them. They could relate to what they stood for, what they believed, or how it impacted their life and our lives now. How significant their living mean to us, and therefore mourning their loss and grieving for them meant something significant. If I say to you on the other end, do you remember that plane from Japan, the 747 that had 520 people that perished in 1985? You probably said, no, not really, but then it probably may or may not mean much to you. If I say to you, what about those 30 plus people who died in here in the southern state in the United States, who died of that tornado on April 13th of this year? Does that mean anything to you? If I say, what about the mass shootings? What about the earthquake, the tornadoes, the tsunami, hurricanes, all these other things that has happened in other countries? You probably said, well, it means something to me or to you as a human being, but maybe it doesn't register as strongly as it should, because it still seems a little far from you, and unless you're directly involved in it, you probably don't feel the great sense of loss or the great need to grieve as others who are directly involved in it. And then if I say to you, well, what about Kobe and Gigi? Kobe was 41 years old. His daughter Gigi was 13 years old. We know how tragic their death was and the impact it has on us immediately. So many people were crying. They've never met Kobe in person, but they could relate to the tragedy. They could relate to the death of those two human beings. And it meant so much to them that they grieved and they cried, and it becomes a significant part of the mourning process. And if I say to you, how about Nelson Mandela? Nelson Mandela died in May of 2013. He was 95 years old. And if I say to you, you know, probably not as many people cried when Nelson Mandela died as say when JFK or Martin Luther King died. You know, and maybe one reason for that is that when Nelson Mandela died, he died of a natural cause. He had lived an immensely productive and amazing life, except for the time when he was in jail. And if you ask me, he probably said that a part of his life that was significant as well. But the point is, he lived a life that was exemplary and was extremely productive, and he died of a natural cause. And even though we admire him, even though we loved him, we still mourn. There's still sadness and grief, but not to the degree as it was, say, in Martin or JFK's case. So it lends itself, so you could see there's a whole continuum of grief and how we grieve and how we look at things. And even now, in today's coronavirus era where people are dying in isolation from all ages, and these are people that we know, people that they're no longer people that are far away. They're people that we know, people who we have relatives who are dying. Some of us have friends or friends of our friends. So this is now something that is definitely mean much more to us now than, say, some distant thing. So when we think of all these different things and we start processing them, we realize that the grieving process is complicated, is complex, but it's something that we need to understand, and we need to try to wrap our head around it. So what do we grab onto? How do we see this thing? Well, for those who are mostly affected, they're mostly affected because grieving establishes essentially a personal connection with friends, family, and whoever you may want that connection to be. And that's what starts the grieving process. Now, when someone dies, it means that something horribly had gone wrong, or they've died, and that in of itself, just the dying process itself, is a sad and terrible thing. And now we're looking at someone who has died and we're saying, something bad has happened to this person. And now you feel sad about it, and rightly so. And the question is now, how do you reconcile it? How do you rationalize it? How do you make sense of what has happened? Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's not. And that's when the grieving process comes in. Do you actually believe this person has died, or you're in denial of it? And are you feeling angered by it? Do you want some justice because of the way this person died? Or is it somewhere where you could just move on and forget about what happened and just focus on the acceptance part of it and say, okay, my relative has lived, or my friend, whoever has lived a long and productive life, and they died of natural causes, and therefore I could move on. But what if it's not? Then you have all these other competing factors that you have to rationalize, you have to come to terms with. So how do you come to terms with them? Well, first thing to realize is that you must embrace the process in order for you to move forward. You can't run away from it. You must find a way to embrace it, to say, you know what, it has happened. This is where my life is. I've lost my loved one, my relatives, my friend, whoever it is, but you must embrace it. And once you embrace it, then the healing process begins. But without embracing it, it is going to be very difficult for you to heal that. So what do we do? How do we respond? Now, do we cry? What if we don't cry? Should we cry? Does the extent of tears we shed equivalent to the amount of love that we feel for that person? What if somebody doesn't cry? Does it mean that they do not love that person, or they do not care about that person, or they're not grieving? What does all of that mean? The answer is that everyone grieves differently. You know, I mean, someone may cry their heart out daily after someone dies. It doesn't mean that their level of grief is any more significant than someone who may not cry. They may not have shed tears. Maybe they just haven't gone to that point where they have accepted the death yet, where they've accepted, well, this person is gone. Maybe they're still in denial. Maybe they're still in the anger stage of the feeling, where they're saying, you know what, I want to know what happened to my loved one. I want to know, I want some justice. And because of that, they're not in that phase of bargaining. They're not in that stage of feeling depressed or sad. So they're not ready to cry yet. But maybe sometime, they will get to that point where they're going to say, you know what, maybe when they're alone, when no one is watching, maybe that's when they're crying. So sometimes we just never know what and when and how someone is going to respond. So that means we should not be in a position, and we're not in a position to tell people how they should grieve and what. I mean, if someone may lose their significant other, I mean, the question is, when do they move on? Who is watching? Does it matter if somebody's watching? You know, because invariably somebody's saying, well, why is that person not sad? I would be sad. Why is that person not doing this? Why is that person still going out? Didn't they just lose their loved one? But again, everyone is different. And you know, the stages that are mentioned of grieving, there are no significant pattern. One doesn't necessarily follow the other. Sometimes you may be angry, sometimes you may be sad, sometimes you may be in disbelief. All of those, sometimes you may even feel guilty. So what do you do? Yeah. Now let me tell you a little story about me. I had a grandmother. My grandmother died about 15 years ago. And I went down to Jamaica to attend her funeral. And on the day of the funeral, I went to the undertaker. We went there early in the morning as she got dressed. And I decided I would hold her. I don't know what I was thinking or what was going through my mind, but I decided I'd hold her. And in the process of doing that, I could feel her cold, hard rock body. And just that sense of what that did to me, it just created an overwhelming sense of grief. And for the greater part of that morning, I cried, and it was so overwhelmingly filled with grief. And by the end of the day, when it was time for the funeral, I got to the funeral, and I was supposed to be the one of those who was giving the eulogy. And I got up there and I said thanks to the people who have come, and you know, let them know that we appreciate them. And then after that, that's when I realized that I cannot talk and cry at the same time, because everything that I tried to say after that was just crying and literally was bawling. It wasn't crying anymore, it was bawling. And I say that to say to you that sometimes these things can be so overwhelming and take so much out of us that we just have to embrace the process. Even now to this day, 15 years later, I still will get a tear in my eye when I think about her. And she had a good life. We did all we could for her, but it doesn't take away the pain completely. Yes, it is better. Yes, it is easier, but embracing it helps us all to move on regardless of the circumstances. Now, sometimes we hope that what happens in this process is that we have a chance to let our loved one know that we love them. We let them know we thank them for what they've done for us. And if applicable, where we need to forgive them or they need to forgive us, we let that part of that process work out and we make it happen. Either we apologize for them, we let them know we forgive them, or we apologize for what we have done wrong, if applicable. That's part of the process. So what happens if you didn't get to do that? It doesn't mean that you cannot go on. You still need to embrace the process. You still need to take that step and say, you know, it didn't happen, but you still have to move on. Don't beat up on yourself. Forgive yourself and move on, but accept it. Because here's what's going to happen. If you don't accept it, then the process is going to just become more difficult for you. What you could do now, and we all could do that, is to make sure for those of us who are living, for those of us who are right here, we still tell our loved ones that we love them, we care for them, we thank them, and we let them know that all the time. So that, God forbid, one day they walk out that door and we never see them again, we at least know they know how we feel, because that is so important. Right now we look at Corona where people are dying in isolation, and it's so painful because people are not getting to spend that last quality time with their loved one, you know, and they can't say the goodbye that they want to. And in spite of the effort being made by some hospital using electronic device, it is still not the same, even though it's better than nothing. So let us use the time we have now to let our people know how much we love them. The other thing I want to say to you as you grieve through this is to remember this. Sometimes we always see death as the ultimate sadness where someone has died. And that is often true. But there are times when people die and that state is actually a better state than they were in, because they were suffering so much for so long, in so much pain, so much anguish. And really, their quality of life has gone to the point where dying is actually a good thing, as painful as that may seem or may sound. And we also have to embrace that and realize that, no, that doesn't take away the need for us to grieve. It doesn't mean that we cannot grieve because we appreciate where they were and what the transition mean for them. We could still grieve and we could still embrace that process. But at least it helped us to cushion the trauma that we were left behind from you know, beating up ourselves and say, oh, mom died, and yes, she died, or dad died, or my cousin or my husband died. But we know that they're, yes, in a better place and they're better off for that. And guess what? Here's where we go from there. The memories that they've left us with. That's what now is going to take us to the next level. The memories that we've created, the times that we've spent, which means that sometimes we're going to remember them and we're going to laugh and we're going to be happy. And other times we're going to cry. Yes, we're going to cry. And we're going to feel the pain. But there's the memory, the good ones, that is going to just take us out of that depressed state and bring us back and put a smile back on our face and say, yes, I remember those days, and yes, they were good. Yes, that's why I love my loved ones. That's what they mean to us. So with all this process that you have to go through, with all the challenges that you have to go through, remember that, one, you must embrace it. You must also be prepared to forgive yourself if necessary. And we must cherish our memory. And for those of you who are still going through it, I want to say to you, it is difficult. We know, because every one of us have gone through tough times, grieving at different stages of our life. So I just want to wish you well and let you know that there is light at the end of the tunnel. Embrace the pain. Cry if you have to, even if it's 10, 15 years after, let it out, cry. You know, if you need counseling, you know, where you could talk to a counselor, a pastor, a friend, or just someone who you have confidence in, do that. It will also help. Be safe, embrace the moment, cherish the people that you love, because at the end of the day, we are going to miss them when they're gone. And we can't say anything after that. And what we do sometimes is only for ourselves and not for them. But let's cherish them. I hope you find this helpful, and I hope you will share it with someone if you do, so that they too may benefit from this. God bless you, and be safe, and take care of yourself. Thank you.